Good evening and welcome to the JKSC podcast. Today, we are delighted to have with us Ms. Nidhi Bahuguna, a strong voice on the Indian sovereignty over territories that have been externally occupied. Thank you for coming here, ma'am. It is truly an honor to be here.
Thank you so
Uh,
much. A pleasure.
for the uninitiated, Nidhi ji is a researcher and writer who is a co-author of the book Occupied Territories of Bharat alongside Captain Alok Bansal. The book examines the historical and geographical circumstances of Indian territories, particularly parts of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh that have been under Pakistani and Chinese occupation, outlining their history, geography, and characteristics to inform readers about this region. Nidhi ji is identified as a senior research fellow at the Asian Eurasian Human Rights Forum and is a member of the academic team of the Jammu Kashmir Study Center. She's written extensively on topics related to Kashmir and India's territorial integrity. Thank you again for being here, ma'am. And but before I officially start, we are celebrating Sankalp Divas on 22nd February. We commemorate it every year in honor of the 1994 resolution. Could you just tell us about that briefly and the significance of the parliamentary resolution that we commemorate on this day?
Yeah, so just before uh, we had this Sankalp Divas, let's take you back a little in history. So Pakistan had declared 5th February as the Kashmir Solidarity Day, and they would host lots of black days, and they would have lots of protests, and this would have rallies, and they would just spew toxic uh, statements around about Jammu and Kashmir. So they kept on saying that Kashmir has to come to us, it is ours, and all. So in response to that, so India also had to do something. So this was on 5th February. They started this Kashmir Solidarity Day, which they observed as a Black Day. And also, that was a time when we were very weak internationally. Do you remember Bill Clinton had stated in the United Nations that Kashmir was a problem and it required international intervention, and we should allow bodies, international bodies, to come through. And then, so we had to come up with something to counter it. So on 22nd February, the whole parliament, it was a joint meeting, and it was an the best part about the resolution is that it's a all party resolution. There is not even one dissent. So it means that every party of India in Bharat was supporting this. So the main thing is that we recognize that our borders are de facto borders are recognized, and we are resolute, and we promise to we are bound to bring back all the areas which consist of POJK. That time they said it POK, and that consisted of Gilgit Baltistan as well as Aksai Chin. Means whatever territory is occupied by any foreigner, the parliament is to bring it back. So that was the resolution on 22nd February 1994. And
That,
the importance of this is once after that, there was a meeting in Switzerland. So that time, Pakistan was going to uh, place a resolution saying that India is doing lots of human rights violations in Kashmir, and we should allow international bodies to come and inspect it. So if that would have been passed, then Kashmir would have just become a playground of all the NGOs. So that is the time Indian diplomacy faced its best, it showed its best foot forward. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the head of the team that went to Switzerland, to Geneva, and then they had they had Salman Khurshid with them, and Hamid Ansari was, I think, an ambassador that time in Iran, and they did hectic, back door dealings, and Iran and other countries. They said that we will not support Pakistan, so Pakistan could not place that resolution. So, in a way, because India had given this resolution, this Sankalp on 22nd February, that is why in March we could face this Pakistani onslaught, and the resolution against India was never bought in the human rights meeting in UN Geneva. So that is the importance, which very few people realize.
yeah, that sounds like a major diplomatic win for us as the country. But if I were to go a little further back when we're setting the context for the creation of POJK in the first place, because there's a lot of information out there, all narratives flood the internet all the time. So, ma'am, if you could just lay out the context of how POJK was constructed, the 1947-48, the events that took place around the time of independence and after, that led to this area being occupied by Pakistan?
So everybody knows that Pakistan wanted Jammu Kashmir to accede to Pakistan. At 1947, 15th December 1940, 15th August 1947, we had two dominions, one dominion of India and one dominion of Pakistan. And the states, the princely states, had to either accept the dominion of Pakistan or of India, subject to geographical they should be geographically attached. So Jammu Kashmir was the only state, princely state, that was connected to both Pakistan as well as India. And all the relief material came through Pakistan. I mean, that was a part of India. So all the relief material, So all the railway lines, like from Sialkot to Jammu, and then we had all the roads coming from that side. So after the partition, Kashmir was still getting all its supply via the areas in Pakistan. So Pakistan stopped sending stuff. The first thing they did was they said, we're not going to send any stuff to India, to Kashmir. So there was a big problem. Until that time, Jammu and Kashmir had not acceded to India. So we could not do anything.
Right.
Then it invaded the Pakistani army. It invaded Jammu and Kashmir from 3 points. It's called Operation Gulmarg, and they had some Pashtun, tribals, but they were trained by the Pakistan army. So when this whole invasion started, before it started, it was a very planned invasion. So all the Muslim soldiers in Maharaja's army, they killed all the Hindus. They killed the Sikhs and the Hindu officers and the persons. So, and they left all the bridges, all the roads undefended. So these people could just come in. So Pakistan, basically it was Pakistan army dressed up as tribals, and a few tribals with whom they had trained, because they wanted to show this is jihad. They didn't want to show this is invasion. So the Maharaja had no choice but to accede to Bharat. So once on 26 October 1947, so we had the Pakistani army invade Jammu and Kashmir. And on 26th October 1947, the Maharaja acceded to the dominion of India. And the Indian army went into action. So, and it saved Srinagar, it saved Baramulla, it saved quite a lot of areas. The real fight was in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad. So where it was terrible, because they had killed all the soldiers and the officers, the Hindu and the Sikh officers of the Maharaja's army. They killed the Wazir-e-Wazarat of Muzaffarabad, and they were killing and raping and looting. So the lucky people, the people who could escape towards India were the lucky ones. The ones we call POJK refugees right now, they were the lucky ones. The others were like butchered. There was, till the Indian army came, nobody else supported them. So when the Indian army came, that was the time that they had some safety and they were saved. Like Poonch was saved, so many areas like that. So then the same thing, while the army was invading from there, from POJK and from the Srinagar side. So in Gilgit-Baltistan, so that was also under the Maharaja. So there was a mutiny. So you have to understand that Gilgit was a very remote place, and it was given back to the Maharaja only on 30th July, and on 15th August we got our independence. So in 15 days, everything could not be transferred. So suddenly there was a whole battalion posted there of Jammu and Kashmir army, and they killed all the Sikhs and the Hindu soldiers of the army, and they rose in mutiny. And like we hear about Gilgit Scouts, so that used to be a small military kind of a setup, but not highly militarized like the army. They were not so good. So there was one Major Brown who was heading them. So on 2nd November the mutiny started, and on 2nd November the mutiny started, and on 4th the Pakistani army they came there, and Major Brown, he said, okay, I'm surrendering. And they could not accede, right? because the Maharaj had already acceded to Bharat. So there was an illegal accession. They said, okay, we are acceding to Pakistan. And it was totally illegal. But then because it was so remote and it was snowing and the ways were all full of snow, so nobody could go there that time. So you understand how this was happening. On one side in October, the army was attacking. And the other side, there was a mutiny sort of a thing in Gilgit-Baltistan. And Gilgit acceded to Pakistan. That's illegal. And then the Pakistani army invaded Baltistan. So Baltistan is the area which is next to that Ladakh, presently our Ladakh area. It's a part of Ladakh in a way. So then it attacked Baltistan. So there was, in Skardu, there was a fort and there was a Major Sher Jung who fought till August 1948. But after August 1948, he could not keep the Pakistani army out and they also gave up, they surrendered. So you can imagine till 1948 this was happening. And then India had gone to the UN, right? But in the UN, so they had a kind of a peace proposal. So they said, okay, wherever the armies are there, that will become the ceasefire line. And immediately all the armies will stop fighting. So this ceasefire came on first, like midnight of 1948 and 1949 starting. So we can say that it started from 1st January. So whatever area was under the occupation of Pakistan, it remained there. And whatever was under the Indian army, it remained there. And it was very sad because lots of people who were coming to safety, who were saved by the Indian army in Poonch, in Bhimber, in Mirpur, in Muzaffarabad, they were left there. Either if they escaped, they came back to India or they were in the refugee camps. So this is how on 1st January 1949, this whole area went under occupation of Pakistan. And then we come to the Ladakh side, right? So there, the Aksai Chin area, that's the eastern Ladakh area, that came under the occupation of Chinese in 1962. They also attacked in October 20th October 1962. They attacked, and in November, on their own, they said, "Okay, we've got this much area. We've occupied what we think is okay," and then they declared a ceasefire, unilateral ceasefire. So around 35,000 square kilometers of eastern Ladakh is under Chinese occupation, and around 70,000 square kilometer of Gilgit-Baltistan and a small area of Mirpur Muzaffarabad is under Pakistani occupation. So this is how this whole two areas went under occupation. And the third thing, the third thing, if you must be hearing of Shaksgam Valley suddenly. Yeah. So there's this valley, which was a part of the Hunza kings, who also ruled over Baltistan and this area. So the Mir of Hunza had acceded, as I told you in the mutiny, the Mir of Hunza said, I am acceding to Pakistan, though he had no legal rights to accede, but he did. So then in 1962, Pakistan and China, this is in May 1962, around that time, our foreign minister was in Rawalpindi that time. And that's the time in 1962, Pakistan and China announced a border agreement. And then India protested because that area was under Pakistan's illegal occupation. And the United Nations peace ceasefire regulations, they said that nothing can be changed. Like the areas will remain under the army. Pakistan army was supposed to withdraw. Indian army was supposed to withdraw. They were supposed to have a plebiscite. That was somewhere around 48, 49. By 1950, they were supposed to have a plebiscite. We never had a plebiscite. And then the rule was that there will be no changes done to the occupied territories. So by even going in an agreement, a border agreement, you are changing the whole setup. You're changing the boundaries. You're changing the structure of the occupied areas. But Pakistan did it. So after China had won that, like whatever, we had the Indo-China War and China occupied Aksai Chin. Then on 3rd March, they signed the Pakistan-China border deal. Okay, and they gave up 5,180 square kilometers of Shaksgam Valley to China. So the agreement states very clearly that this is a disputed property, and then whenever this dispute is resolved, China will enter into fresh negotiations with whoever gets that territory. Now China is saying, hey, it's our territory, we can do anything. But the treaty says that, and India protested that time. It was a shock for Bharat. That time we did not have so much of knowledge, we did not have social media. And when Pakistan announced that it had reached this, India came to know around 6th March. And that time also they were not sure what has happened. So they're very interesting MEA notes and the parliament, nobody knew what had happened. So this is how our areas have been occupied.
That's actually very tragic now that I listen to it in a context of a sequence of things. We just keep losing our areas. But ma'am, that just leads me to my next question also. What is the legal standpoint that India has now in order to occupy this? Like, I mean, are we able to claim it as our own legally?
It's always our own, because our map, there are two maps. One is the de jure map, which is the legal map. And interestingly, if you see in our book, and if you see, I have sent some slides, there was one map which was of 1947. So when Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India. So it had much more parts than what we have right now. There's a red line that shows some parts which we don't claim now, but we claimed that time. That areas were Takdambush Pamir and an area called Raskam and Shakskam. So this is a part of a map. It's a legal map. And interestingly, first time America has actually published the same map. So
Yeah,
everybody knows.
apparently.
And even the 1947 map is from the CIA, where they've
Uh-huh.
written this was the limit, and this is what is occupied, and this is what is disputed. So, first of all, then we have the Britishers, right? The British maps. Then we have the whole Gazette notification of July, which says that the area of Gilgit-Baltistan is being given back to Jammu and Kashmir government. It's a proper Gazette notification, which these are all legal documents. Then the accession of the Jammu and Kashmir king, that was the rule that time. The rule was that you have to accede, the king has to accede, the princely state, the king has to accede, and the governor general has to accept. So both these things were done. And then third was that in 1950, all the princely states had to sign the proclamation of coming into under India's constitution. So all of them signed. So then, and Article 1 of our constitution, which we adopted on 26 January 1950, says you can come in, but you can't go out. So legally, we have these parts are ours. De facto, they are occupied. Okay. But de jure map says these, and we have full rights over it. And that is the reason we are protesting whenever they have elections there, anything happens there. So we are protesting.
Right. Actually, that's very interesting to know. But actually, Gilgit-Baltistan also we have legal rights over, right?
Totally.
Uh, yeah, but it's also of strategic importance to China, apparently. Why do you think that is?
China and Pakistan, they never shared a land border. And actually, India and China never shared a land border. We had Tibet and we had Xinjiang, the Xinjiang, or Eastern Turkestan. So we never shared a border with China as such. We went through the trade routes. Okay. And Pakistan was from this side. From where would Pakistan ever have a land connection? But by occupation of Gilgit-Baltistan, okay, so they had a land connection, overland connection to China. Because China by then had occupied Xinjiang. It's the autonomous province of Xinjiang, whatever, like it was called Xinjiang first. So that is how they managed to have a border with China. Then China occupied Tibet. So then China has come up till there. So basically, now then you have to understand. Now China has got a border with Pakistan via the occupied territory of Gilgit-Baltistan. Now Gilgit was a central point in the ancient routes. What they call silk routes was the Uttarpad. It was a northern route which was there from the time of Mahabharata, and then it connected to the south. So this route, this what they're saying, Karakoram Highway, was a part of the ancient routes, trade routes. Gilgit was at the crossroads. Now, very interesting. The distance to Chennai from Gilgit is nearly the same as the distance to St. Petersburg. The distance to Delhi from Gilgit is nearly the same as the distance to Iran. So you can imagine how important Gilgit is. So the ancient trade routes that went via Gilgit, they went to Kashgar. So Kashgar used to be another trade stop. And Kashgar used to be called Kashi in the ancient times. And then the whole of Karakoram has at least 10,000 rock carvings, which we call petroglyphs, which are showing, which have Sanskrit, Brahmi. It has, they show Buddha, and they show, ibex. They've got scribbled. There's one very interesting they found of Ram Balram, Krishna Balram. Then there is a very nice, and this is all we've got from the archives of Pakistan also, and lots of people who have gone on these. So there is one very interesting rock carving that says Sri Ram from Mathura had come here on this date. So you can imagine how important it was. Then we come to Baltistan, we come to Ladakh. Ladakh was again a center of trade. So we have Kashgar diaries of the British. In that, they're written that in certain years, in 1901 or 2, the trade was around 25 lakh rupees that time. Traders would come with trunks full of gold and silver dust. Because Gilgit and Baltistan have Indus River flowing, it's very rich in gold mines, and people actually they take the water and they mine the sand and they get gold dust. And so you can imagine the kind of prosperity Bharat had. Bharat was a Sone ki chidiya for because it had these trade routes. So when you imagine this, then you have ancillary trade routes coming in. Then you have trade routes going from Ladakh, from Leh to Hoshiarpur, where they have lots of they had woolen factories there. So this whole area was a bustling highway, and it was so safe under the Dogra kings that it is written by the British themselves that if the mules broke down or they died, people would just leave their merchandise and move on to the next stop, get fresh animals, come back, and nobody would touch their merchandise. So, like all these things are forgotten. We think Ladakh, Leh is very, very remote. It wasn't. And from there's a trade route going to Yarkhand. Old name was Harikhand. So, and the Maharaja had a fort, Sanju, it was called, on the way for Yarkhand, but then he could not maintain it after certain about 70, 80 years, and they gave it up to the Chinese. But that was there. Like the Maharaja, till there, they used to take taxes. Everything is recorded. Mehta Basti Ram was the Wazir. He's recorded all the tax thing, how many he took. And interestingly, we had an enclave called Minsar near Kailash Mansarovar in southern Tibet. Okay. Now, this area was always under the Ladakh kings. Always. And it was so, though Tibet had other rulers, but this enclave was always for Bharat. The taxes were always paid to whoever was ruling Ladakh, and they used to maintain Kailash Mansarovar, and it was like a free trade zone. People from people from Garhwal would go there, people from Himachal would go there, and they would rest, and all the tourists, all the pilgrims would go there. So this area was also given away. It wasn't actually given away after the Panchil. This thing, nobody thought about Minsar. Jawaharlal Nehru said if Minsar comes on the talks, on the Panchil talks, we'll give it away, but it never came. till 1962, they were paying taxes to Indians. Like our ministers would go, and the people there would give taxes to our Indian ministers till 1962. That is all recorded. And the parliament had, they have a white paper on this where they have written how many families were there and how much they collected. So we have right now, we desperate to go to Kailash Mansarovar. China gives us passports. We go via Nepal, or otherwise the route was from an area called Demchok in Ladakh. Okay, that area right now the village is half with China. I mean with Tibet, occupied Tibet, and half of it is with Bharat. So the route was from Demchok. It was a straight route, and it went to Kailash Mansarovar. It should take a week by yaks. And now we have lost that. And now we go through Nepal and Sikkim, and we go through very difficult passes. But there we had this route, which we lost it after 1962. So these are a few of the areas which we lost. But we have claims. We have tax receipts. We have old maps. We have Chinese maps that are showing that all this area was under Bharat. We have Chinese postal. Yeah.
That is so tragic. It is legally ours, and we still can't lay claim to it. It is horribly tragic that it was also the center of so much trade, and we've lost all of that as well. But ma'am, that also it is still a center for trade and economics. I think CPEC is still being heavily influenced, fed by this region. It's still strategically important to China in that respect.
Yeah. So then China, first of all, again, it broke all the UN, whatever they had set up for ceasefire. The 1948 resolutions all are broken because you could not change anything in the occupied territories. But then, first of all, in 1974, the Karakoram Highway was built. Okay. Then, likewise, in till 5th August 2019, we had the domicile law. We had 35A, and nobody else could come into Kashmir by land. So the same thing was in POJK, and the same thing was in Gilgit-Baltistan. But in Gilgit-Baltistan, they stopped that law, okay, and then they settled lots of Pashtuns and Pathans and Punjabis from Pakistan into Gilgit-Baltistan. See, Gilgit-Baltistan is mainly Shia. It was mainly Shia. So they've settled lots of Sunnis there. And so then they built Karakoram Highway. And after that, even that was, Indians protested against that, India. And then in 2012 and 13, the CPEC started. So that is the time India protested because it is going through our territory. See, the shortest way, if you see the map, China's weakest point is the fact it has to go through Malacca Straits, right? If it makes a CPEC, so then because it is occupied Xinjiang, so from Kashgar, straight a landlocked area gets access to sea through Gwadar. So the area that is the most important area is going through Gilgit-Baltistan. And that is a part of ours. But the interesting thing is that it is not, initially it took off. Right now it is quite paralyzed. Because the people of Gilgit and Baltistan, you must have heard lots of news reports. Initially, they would attack Chinese, they would take them prisoners. But of late, the whole, you can say the intensity of work and the speed of work has really decreased. CPEC is there, it's being built, but then because of China's goods that came in, the land that was acquired, it has set in a lot of anger with the local population. Because again, China was dumping its stuff, it was cheaper, the local shopkeepers went out of business. So lots of these small things are happening. But lately, because we don't get news directly from there, we get news through other news channels, and I read all the papers, Pamir Times and all. I keep on reading them. So now we hardly have news of CPEC. Initially, it was a lot. So CPEC is the most important thing because anything like oil tankers, they would take so many days to go and through that Gulf of Oman. Then it comes to Arabian Sea. India can stop them anytime because we are very strong. Then it goes down, then it goes through the Malacca Straits, and then it goes to Shanghai and all that area. With this, can you imagine, through the landlocked areas, within a week it would be able to go to Gwadar. And there's no danger, you know. There's no Indian danger, there is no Malacca Strait danger. So whatever this supplies are, they'll just come through. So it's a great thing. And for even the Central Asian republics were very interested in CPEC. But now we don't find anybody talking about CPEC, if you see. Initially, even Afghanistan was interested. Everybody was interested. Who would not be?
Yeah. That's
But
good news for us for sure, that things
you
are
never
slowing down
know
there.
when they start, what they do.
Yeah,
But
but I think we can
yeah,
still count on it for to be slow that way.
like Gwadar is made a lot. Like they made the Gwadar is a functional port, but we don't see any Chinese ships going there and tankers docking. We don't hear of any such news, no?
Not
So
anymore, thank God.
yeah. So yeah, it is very important to us because it has cut off our access, if you see, to the mainland,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
but like you mentioned, ma'am, things changed a lot for that region after the 5th August 2019 abrogation of 370. I think things have shifted generally for even the Indian Kashmir, the Jammu and Kashmir state as we have had it, and Ladakh, and the whole UT
yeah.
construction there. Ma'am, what do you think are the key changes that happened? What this was a definite turning point, but now what do you think of the legal position that we have over the POJK territories in
See what
light of
happened.
this?
The best part was for the first time, Ladakh is made a separate UT. And then you saw the map of Ladakh, the Leh district is huge. And everybody asked, why is it so huge? This was the original northern areas. This was the original map that was there in around 1901, 1902. So we have actually localized the problems of whatever, the occupied Baltistan area, which is adjoining Ladakh. So we've localized that problem there. Okay. So the Kargil War, if you remember, when the Kargil War took place, so everybody, all the army, Pakistani army, the supply routes and all were occupied Baltistan. So now we have localized that into Ladakh, right? Otherwise, it was under Jammu and Kashmir and whoever was there in the state. But now it is totally localized. And then when you come to Kashmir, again the map, it shows two new districts, Mirpur and Muzaffarabad. So that's a big thing. First time we have actually said these are our areas. And POJK, what they call Azad Kashmir, we called Mirpur Muzaffarabad. Now that has got an identity. Okay, this is Mirpur Muzaffarabad. So till now we didn't know what to say. We didn't know what to call it. So that is very important. People did not realize the importance of making the occupied area Mirpur Muzaffarabad. So that makes it up, and we show it in a map.
Right.
Okay. And again, Ladakh. So Kashmir, UT of Kashmir problems are localized in the UT of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and the problems of Ladakh are localized within Ladakh, the
Mm.
UT. So it breaks that monopoly. Okay. And as it is, the Shias of Kargil and all, they never had bands when the valley would announce bands. As you know, the Shia Sunni fault line is there. That is totally gone now. So right now, a few days back, we had protests in Baltistan, the area which we took back from Pakistan in 1971. They were protesting against the killing of three Baltistani Shias in the bomb blast which took place in a mosque. You must remember in a Imambara in Quetta, I think it took place. No,
Yeah, ma'am.
yeah. There's so many actually bomb blasts that you lose. You know
You lose track of what's happening when. Yeah.
that the one that took place in a Shia Imambara. So in that, three people from Baltistan died.
Mm.
So again, that anger, first time we are hearing Pakistan Murdabad in that area. So you can imagine, then people here in Kashmir as well as in Ladakh, they see how badly people are suffering in the occupied area. And they realize we are better off. There was a time when very few people know in Baltistan. I must tell you this. Uh, they respect swastik, right? Their mosques have swastiks. They call it Yundrung. This is the pre-Islamic beliefs. All the yak collars will have swastiks. So it is as pious for them as it is pious for us. And the flag of the Baltistan Youth Party, it has a swastik. And now people are coming back to the Tibetan roots and they're writing, I mean, the language, the script. They're using their script now instead of Urdu. Then there was a time in the Shias when they were having lots of sectarian violence. They came to LOC and they said, okay, let us in. We are citizens of India. Give us, give us reservations in your IITs. Give us reservations. And but then that was short-lived. Pakistan has a law that says that nobody can say that we will not secede to. I mean, we shall not be a part of Pakistan. So there, nobody can actually say it. It is the people who don't stay there, who's staying in the West. They are the ones who say this more now. But then again, a lot of times you'll hear that we are citizens of India. Why don't you look up at us? When in 2000, I think 15, PM Modi had said, he had mentioned Gilgit Baltistan in his speech, and there were lots of celebrations and sense of hope that yes, somebody's spoken about us. So I think Kashmir and Ladakh, they are having teething problems. Everybody, they will have, but they are in a much better space than they were pre 2029. And the difference is so stark that people in Gilgit Baltistan, I will not say for POJK, but at least in Gilgit Baltistan, they are realizing that and Baltistan especially, because half the many families are divided after the 1971 war. So we occupied a bit of Baltistan. We got a few areas of Baltistan back into Bharat, but somehow still left that side. And again, when 1949 ceasefire took place, so it was the time when the Darbar would, like the kings and all, the government would shift to Skardu. So lots of families were again divided. So in Baltistan, there is more anger against Pakistan, and
Right.
there are calls all the time that have your we want the access back again. We want Skardu to Kargil road open. We want Khaplu to Leh road open. So that way, there's always this, and always it is Kesi in the Indian side, people are happy. So that is coming in.
Right.
But in Gilgit and that area, it is not so pro India as yet. It is more anti Pakistan. Yeah,
Right. I imagine it must be really difficult to actually get some on-ground information about that area as well.
very
And
difficult.
but
I
what
Yeah.
no, what I was getting, what are some on-ground, maybe like some civil society actors within the POJK? Are they able to speak up upon those rights? What are their political activisms like?
See, the what I have found through social media basically. Like I keep on seeing anything with Baltistan, Gilgit, and I read Pamiri Times and small whenever they come on online. And Dawn is banned now, so otherwise I used to read Dawn also and get an idea what's happening. And of course, like all newspapers, you can't trust what they're saying. But then I'll tell you what's happening is the civil society there within Pakistan, within Gilgit Baltistan, they're more worried about their politics. They're more worried about, getting power within Gilgit Baltistan, and they want to have more rights in Pakistan. I'll tell you very honestly, right now, it is not pro India at all. On the contrary, they say, no, we are not pro India. But the society people outside, they are very vociferous. They say we are citizens of India. We should be taken care of. Because otherwise, they'll be killed, they'll be imprisoned. So right now, you must have heard of lots of protests that took place in Gilgit Baltistan and in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad. But then what I found was that most of these protests, they were there to dislodge the elected governments. I mean, whatever elections they have, they were to dislodge them. So this is very interesting. I'll tell you. In November 2020, they had elections in Gilgit-Baltistan, which India protested. Of course, it's our area. Why are you having elections? So PTI came into power. Within 2 years, the chief minister had to leave. He had to resign because his law degree was found to be fake. And then another PTI member took over. But then whatever happens in Pakistan, the same politics is repeated there. So all these protests, when they were taking place, so they were aimed more at getting rid of PTI and getting their, Nawaz Sharif faction back in, both in Mirpur Muzaffarabad as well as in Gilgit-Baltistan. Right now, there is no elected government in Gilgit-Baltistan. They have a caretaker government. Okay. And then there were lots of, protests, first about electricity. For nearly a month, the Karakoram, the place where they do trading, that was blocked. The traders sat on a protest. Then there's a dry port called Sost for a month. Even in January last year, January this year, for a lot of days the trade was stopped because they're just getting 10 minutes of electricity. Then there was the shortage of wheat, which we all heard about. And then when the people of Gilgit-Baltistan, they said, okay, we'll give you more wheat. Then there were more protests in Mirpur Muzaffarabad. If you can give them wheat, extra wheat, why can't you give us extra wheat? So there's this problem of wheat in Gilgit-Baltistan. This problem of electricity, very, very severe problem. They're getting 10 minutes only daily. So the traders and all, they are sitting in protests. And there was a huge protest last year where the lawyers, the traders, the students, they ghirawed the chief minister's house, and there was a total block. But we hardly heard about it. We hear a bit about the POJK area, the Mirpur Muzaffarabad. Again, I will tell you, it is not pro-India. It is a part of the politics of Pakistan that takes place. Again, the same thing. The PTI was there, Niazi was there,
Yeah.
and then Imran Khan was displaced, and again, PTI got out, and then PPP took over, and right now the chief minister is from PML, Nawaz Sharif. So it is just a reflection of whatever happens in Pakistan. There is anger, but the anger is more against the Pakistani army than pro-India. This much I'll tell you. Right now, it is not pro-India. At least in Mirpur Muzaffarabad. In Gilgit also, it is not so much pro-India. But Baltistan, yes, the bordering areas, they may have a pro-India feel, but it has not come out as yet. Maybe if our government does something, make some, like even our government has never actually stated that, okay, we'll support you. So more of it is that they have this idea of Balwaristan. And they say, okay, we'll become an autonomous thing because our culture is different from them. And then again, the sectarian violence. Again, people from Shias from Baltistan, they were in a bus, and the bus was stopped and ambushed, and Shias were murdered. So this was last year in August. So it was a very big thing. And again, whenever the sectarian violence takes place, then the most interesting is last 30th December 2025, TTP, that is Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. Okay, they announced that Gilgit-Baltistan will also be a part of TTP, and they said this is going to be Kashmir Vilayat. Okay, they declared a whole structure, and they declared an air force also for Gilgit-Baltistan. And they said we're going to be attacking Pakistan. But then we know they're anti-Shias. So again, there is a danger for Shias. TTP is anti-India. So there's a danger for us also. So Gilgit-Baltistan right now is becoming a playground for TTP also. And then there is again one Jangvi something. They have so many names. There is also anti-Shia. So, and they also TTP kidnapped a minister. last year for a while, and then after this to show that the power they have, and then after 8 hours he was let off. So all this is happening in Gilgit-Baltistan, which is very worrying for India because we are bordering. Though right now Afghan Taliban has is anti-Pakistan and it has kind of come towards India. But then TTP is actually not directly in control with Afghan Taliban.
Right.
So this,
That sounds very concerning for the region. But, ma'am, how do global superpowers see this region? Do they still feel it's a bilateral conflict between India and Pakistan, or have they got a more nuanced perspective on this now?
see, now Pakistan has always tried to make it
Yeah.
international, to internationalize Kashmir, but then post 5th August 2019, it has not been able to do so. It tried Operation Sindoor to internationalize it. It has Turkey, which is supporting it, and one or two. But normally, if you find that nobody interferes anymore, America will interfere in a way to how to stop China from coming more into this territory. We also hoped for some time. People hoped that US will support us to take back our area, and then and not let China come in. So for some time they did not show any interest. But this latest map, it is like it is first time I think US has made that map. Even Google has changed that map, their map. Now if you say ask India map, you'll get a full India map, with full Jammu and Kashmir and Aksai Chin and everything in it. So we don't know why they did that. Is it that now they've understood that one way to repel China from here, because if China gets setback, then it's bad for US also. Everybody understands the importance. It's very very important. India has suffered a lot because we lost access to middle continent. We lost access to Central Asia. We can't go into Afghanistan because we have no land route. How do we go to Uzbekistan? How do we go to any other place? We have no land route left. If we get a land access, then India can rise much higher, much faster. It can become the golden bird again. Of course, whatever happens, China does anything in LAC, we can always counterweight it with our naval presence right now, because everything has to go via Arabian Sea and Malacca Straits. And once that Port Blair, our Andaman Nicobar thing comes through, you have to see the whole picture. How important that area is. So that is one counterweight to the naval area. We can still do it, like anytime China will also keep on troubling us there when there is when it feels that Indian Navy is getting too strong or something. So right now there are lots of factors.
Yeah, this
And
definitely seems like a very important conversation that we need to be having more. But, ma'am, in your experience within the policy circles, within the broader circles who discuss these things, how is the idea of reclaiming POJK envisioned? As in, how do we reimagine borders per se?
yeah, see, of course the issue borders are always there.
Yeah.
Okay, their problem is that the demography of Gilgit Baltistan, it worries the people of Kashmir, of Jammu and of Ladakh both. Okay, I'll be very honest, because it's going to be a massive demographic change. So the locals are not too keen, except maybe Skardu to Kargil or Kaflu to Leh. Beyond that, I don't think that they are too enthused about having a such a big demographic shift. But then it's our land. We need the access. See, till Modi ji made that speech, we had actually given up on that area. It was almost said, "Okay, forget it. Like let the LOC become the international border." There were talks. There were talks of giving up Siachen also, if you remember. So right now, I don't think there is any clarity in policy. We keep on saying POJK, we keep on saying POJK, but I doubt anybody has planned, how will India, Bharat feel when that portion comes back? Nobody's actually imagined. So it's a very good question which you are asking. What is the imagination? How do we plan? Do we go slowly? Like, do we open the route from Skardu to this, or do we just, have the have all the countries saying, how will Pakistan leave? How will Pakistan suddenly leave? It won't. The army is entrenched very well there. So, are we going to have a war, land war, or how is it going to take place? See, these are very normal questions. Will China give us access to, beyond Karakoram, we had very good routes. Will it give us access to that? If it gives us access to that, then we can again go to Central Asia. But will China do it? When it's got SEPEC, then we have to see what Balochistan is doing. If Balochistan manages to, separate from Pakistan, right? Then maybe Pakistan gets so weak and then the army has to go there. We still don't know. Right now, Pakistan is very restive, but I doubt the Western powers will let Pakistan implode right now. It's very important for them. But tomorrow, maybe if the geopolitical situation changes, you never know. People may, the Western powers may want, that it should come back to Bharat, and then, that then through Bharat they have, strategic points there.
Seems
So
like it's going to be a long game now.
it's a long
But
game. It's a long game.
yeah.
But then we cannot forget our territories, you see. The day we forget it, we have a Sharda Peeth in
Yeah.
Muzaffarabad. It's a Shakti Peeth, right? We can't forget it. And then we have Gurudwaras there. We have a Shivala temple in Mirpur, right? Then we have 10,000 plus, rock cuttings. In Skardu, we have a mandal, full carvings of Buddha and his mandal. We can't let that go. In Skardu, we have a Patshahi Gurudwara, which is used by the Northern Light Infantry, which attacked in Bharat. So that is occupied. We can't let all that go. Demography can still be managed, maybe make it autonomous or do whatever. But then they are sacred areas for us. We just can't forget about them. You never
Absolutely.
like the Shias, because their pre-Islamic faith is more towards, they want their language. They have their swastiks in all the mosques. So all these things are plus. Many of them are calling the areas by the old names, by the Sanskrit names. They are the ones who told us that it is Kashgar is Kashi, Yarkhand is Harikhand. So slowly,
Yeah.
if we have to keep on telling, we have to keep on saying that these are our borders, these are our people. We have to keep it. We have to keep on imagining that the de facto borders are the de jure borders.
Yeah, and the stability of the region is heavily impacted by it. Like I remember during the Kargil war, people entered from Gilgit-Baltistan region, and recently during the Pahalgam attack as well, many terrorist centers they still occupy this region. We've seen that time and time again. So I think our regional stability depends very heavily on the spaces that we haven't yet occupied officially. How do you think that stability of the region will play out in respect to this?
It's going to be unstable.
Yeah.
Till Afghanistan is unstable, till Middle East is unstable, till Iran is unstable. So this whole area is going to be unstable because Gilgit-Baltistan is a central. It gives strategic depth to Pakistan, and through Pakistan it gives strategic depth to US and and the allies of Pakistan. It gives if this area goes away from Pakistan, the strategic depth is also gone. So it will keep on. They will keep. Right now, it suits everybody to keep this area rested because it gives access to Afghanistan. It gives access to Central Asia. Then China is also interested in this area because it's made roads, it's made SEPEC, and then at Siachen, three nuclear powers meet. You see, China, Pakistan, and Bharat. And we are lucky to keep Siachen because we're at the highest. Then after Karakoram Pass, that area, it's very, very important for us to get access. But will China make us strong like that? So the whole thing is, right now it is very in a flux. All we can do at Jammu Kashmir Adyan Kendra and just educate people about these areas exist. Tell them Gilgit is a part of Bharat. There's a Buddha statue, huge Buddha statue outside Gilgit. It's called the Gilgit Buddha. And then we were having a meeting, and in that meeting, student of archaeology, she told me that the whole structure behind the Buddha is of Mathura art. That means people from Mathura must have gone and made that. It's Mathura art. Like we would expect it to be Gandhar art, but it was Mathura art. And even the mandals. So lots of these are from. So once we establish our ancient links, and the population is not too much, of this area. It's very sparsely populated. So maybe that fear of demographic invasion will be less. It is more in POJK than in Gilgit-Baltistan. But we have to keep it, you see. We have to keep on imagining that we get back Gilgit, we get back, our access. We have to keep on it. Once we are giving it, then the policy makers will make policies, you see. Right now, nobody talks about it, right? At least after we talked about it, we got Mirpur Muzaffarabad added as a district. You see, small incremental things. We've got Ladakh, Leh, as it was, a district of Leh, as it was. So slowly, that, the recollection is coming. And then we have the, in the normal government bulletins, they tell us Gilgit has got this much rain, Muzaffarabad is getting this. So slowly, what we need that what I feel that our books, our history books, they should be mentioning all this. Our geography books should be mentioning that the highest peak is in Gilgit-Baltistan is K2, not, in India we say the highest peak is Kanchenjunga, we say is K2. You see, it's in Gilgit-Baltistan. Then we have 5 biggest glaciers outside polar region in Gilgit-Baltistan. So we should teach the children. So once they learn all this, then automatically become a part of the nation's conscience. If they learn about the peak, Sharda, Peet, in the history lesson, if they learn about all that areas, Mirpur Muzaffarabad, the next generation will grow up demanding it, no? Right now, we don't know. We should talk about Minsar. We should tell about, the Indian enclave of Minsar. When we began writing the book and all, after that, China celebrated its Republic Day in Minsar, which it had never done before in October. Because
That is huge.
yeah. So, like it began celebrating its Republic Day there to show, okay, it's ours. Till then, it never did. So, we have to just tell people that we have an Indian enclave in Kailash Mansarovar. Where is that? Where is our Sharda Peeth? Where are those, all our, very pious places? Why can't we go and worship at, Gilgit Buddha?
Right. That's given us, ma'am, you've given us a lot of food for thought here and a very clear way forward of what our responsibility would be. I hope that there's some clarity and some action that comes out of the kind of conversations that we keep on having about this.
It
This
will,
is, yeah,
small increment. We've got beautiful Muzaffarabad. We can turn this area,
yes,
and we've got
absolutely.
Baltistan as a part of Leh, Ladakh, the Leh district.
Right.
So it's starting.
That's
Yeah.
It's starting gradually, but steadily it's going to happen. We can hope for a better demographical shift as well for the region and overall regional stability in times to come. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. This was truly a very insightful conversation. It gave us a lot of food for thought here, and we're truly honored that you were able to take out the time for this.
Thank you so much.